Wonderful. All right, and we're going to share the screen. All right. So the first week we kind of talked about the initial steps which were the remove steps. So remove, we're talking about removing any fungal, bacterial, any kind of microbes that are in the gut that are not supposed to be there in order to heal the gut lining. We also talked about removing food-based triggers, food sensitivities, those kind of things. Last week, we talked more about the replacing. So we're putting back in, not just taking things out, we're putting back in things to the body, specifically gut, that the body needs in order to digest the food more effectively. So we talked about using some food-based enzymes and also some supplemental-based enzymes, things like apple cider vinegar, and then digestive enzymes like pancreatic enzymes as well. And then we also introduced the reinoculate stage, which is basically putting back in or rebalancing the gut microbiome, killing off any bacterial dysbiosis or an imbalance in the good and bad bacteria, and then put in a whole bunch of really good quality probiotics. We talked about doing that through food and then supplementation as well. And we're going to recap that in just another minute. And then this week, we're going to talk more about the repair of the actual gut microbiome and the immune system, and then the rebalance piece. So again, as a recap, you saw this slide last week. We talked about what leaky gut was and the symptoms and conditions that have been associated with that. If you remember, just about any kind of inflammatory reaction in the body that's chronic, so things like high blood pressure, heart disease, cognitive concerns, neurological issues like Alzheimer's, dementia, but even symptoms like brain fog, irritability, all of those can be affected by this leaky gut process. And then once we get food particles, bacteria into the bloodstream, unfortunately, a kind of host of inflammatory processes happen that can lead to food sensitivities, that can lead to things like autoimmunity as well. And then also we see things like micronutrient malabsorption, so vitamin deficiencies, mineral deficiencies as well, all because of this leaky gut protocol. So in functional medicine, we want to make sure that we address the things that are going to cause the leaky gut. So we talked a lot about diet. So I would say 80-ish% of what we do in functional medicine is address healthy diet. That is the number one way we integrate how we get our body to function normally is through the things that we integrate in through the things that we ingest, so swallow and utilize in our gut. There's other ways to integrate the environment through breathing it in, through topical application, but a lot of it comes through the things that we're eating. So that's what we need to prioritize, getting off of those processed foods, sugary foods, too much alcohol, the standard American diet, if you will, and then making sure we're getting enough of those good gut healing foods. So omega-3 fatty acids. We do recommend more of like a Mediterranean-based food plan. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail, the Mediterranean diet, next week. Because next week is when you're exiting the elimination diet and then going on to more of a long-term based food plan. Fiber is amazing to help feed the microbiome and protect against leaky gut as well. So making sure we're getting enough good, healthy, healing foods in our body, whole foods, and get rid of the processed stuff. Tonight, we're going to talk a little bit more about how stress impacts our microbiome and also the leaky gut concept. And then obviously, we already kind of talked about a little bit how antibiotics and alcohol and other foodborne concerns can actually damage the gut lining. So all of that's a recap. We also talked about dysbiosis, the imbalance between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria, how that's influenced by processed foods and glyphosate that's in our food supply. Talked a lot about antibiotics and other medications that can cause this, and environmental triggers as well. And in order to fix that dysbiosis, we can use the probiotics and prebiotics. So remember, the prebiotics are the food for the probiotics. Probiotics are the beneficial bacteria. Prebiotics are typically fiber, inulin. These are things like green leafy vegetables. These things are pomegranate seeds. All these are natural fiber sources that feed the microbiome in a good, healthy way. You can take probiotics or you can get them in through your diet through things like kefir, kombucha, yogurt type foods. That it's kind of what we talked about to kind of rebalance that. I like to take a probiotic. And then we talked about the postbiotics, which is basically the food for the cells in the colon to actually protect it, right? So your soldiers are those little cells in the colon. If they're not getting fed these postbiotics, like the butyrate, the propionate, the acetate, they're actually not very healthy and they can start to break down. And all those are called short chain fatty acids. Just to reiterate, the symptoms of leaky gut, typically our patients are going to complain of things like digestive issues, bloating, abdominal pain, diarrhea, chronic constipation, those kind of things. But remember, these symptoms can also be very systemic. So skin rashes, hives, itchy eyes, kind of that histamine response. And then of course we see nutritional deficiencies as well. And then that can link to that systemic inflammatory response. And then we start seeing autoimmune disorders like lupus and fibromyalgia, Hashimoto's. All of those have been associated with leaky gut. So that was a recap. So now we're going to talk about things to repair our gut lining. So those are usually things that we're going to add back in. These are micronutrients and minerals and additional supplementation to actually help repair the actual gut lining. And the last piece of it, which I think are the most important piece, is to rebalance, right? So usually when I can eat very clean, I can take all my supplements, I can make sure I'm taking my probiotics, I can take the things that repair my gut lining, but almost always the thing that throws me into an autoimmune flare is this rebalancing piece of it. So I know it's so super important, but stress on the gut can affect everything, and that's what can actually throw you back into an autoimmune process. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the gut-brain connection there, how that works, but also the gut-brain adrenal connection, why that's so important. So how do you heal the gut lining, right? So we already talked about the other things about the probiotics and feeding those, but there are actual ingredients that basically are compounds that actually protect that mucus barrier of the gut and actually form a mucus lining and actually feed those soldiers so they're strong and capable and actually rebuild this gut lining. Collagen, and so these are peptides, right? So there's very long string of protein. Collagen peptides are very, very good. There's a lot in the literature right now talking about colostrum. So colostrum is that really good amino acid, immune system rich part of breast milk, essentially. Typically when we're doing this, we're getting our colostrum from animal-based breast milk, because that's weird, right? To buy colostrum from a human being. So it is coming from animal-based, and typically it's going to be cows that we get the colostrum, and that colostrum is just so soothing for our gut lining. A little bit of interesting factoid that you may not know is that when babies are born from their mother, they all have very leaky gut, right? They're just not, their guts have not formed very well yet. They all are born with leaky gut. And it's the mother's colostrum that they ingest the first couple of weeks of their life that actually heals their leaky gut and seals that up so they can actually start absorbing larger food particles as they mature in age. So colostrum is super powerful. There's a lot of good brands out there right now. Other amino acids, so things like glutamine are really good for this. Gelatin's really good. Bone broth is probably a really healthy, natural source of most of these compounds together. So bone broth is really good. Sipping on bone broth can actually help support appetite suppression, but it also kind of heals the gut lining. One little caveat to that, and someone brought this up early about like the histamine response too. So, if you're already somebody who's like super allergic and you've got a lot of rhinitis and sniffling, you may have a histamine response issue. And if you react negatively to things like fermented foods, which typically have a high histamine content, you actually may react to bone broth as well. So if you feel worse on some of these things, then just back down on them as far as the dosing and weight. You just need some more healing time first, or maybe take a supplement that's a more of a pure, more isolated form where you don't have the entire bone broth. So there are also some vitamin and mineral benefits from vegetables. So zinc is a really good one, magnesium and vitamin D. All of these contain antioxidants that are actually really good to help support the gut lining. There are also some additional Chinese herbs, so things like marshmallow root, aloe vera is really good for this as well. And then some additional compounds that actually basically coat that intestinal lining that have been used in Chinese medicine for a long time. Omega-3 fatty acids are really good for this too. I've seen a lot of, specifically, I see younger populations who don't like fish or don't like avocado. They don't eat the nuts and seeds. They like the adolescent teenage girls. They are very deficient in omega-3 fatty acids, but omega-3 fatty acids are absolutely necessary to protect that gut lining and actually start to heal the gut lining. Also, omega-3 fatty acids are very powerful anti-inflammatories in the body. So getting as much of these in the diet that you can, olive oil, nuts and seeds, walnuts, cashews, and then avocados seem to be really good to help support that, that gut lining as well. So this is just kind of a summary slide. Again, these things, most of these gut healing herbs and nutraceuticals are usually going to be found in a supplemental form altogether. So they're using things like Leaky Gut Revive, Leaky Gut Protocol. We carry some things in our office as well. The little samples, if you're able to come pick up your little cosmetic bag, you should have had a sample of the OptiCleanse GIHI. It has almost all of these things in that one package. So it's kind of a once and done medical food that's a multivitamin, multi-mineral support as well. And it's really, really good for the gut. We've actually had that's really good for healing, and I use that in my gut restoration protocols. You can do an additional aloe vera, especially if you're like someone who like tends to be a little bit more on the constipated side. Aloe vera also kind of helps support like that gut motility, so kind of keep things moving a little bit better. So the repair piece is really the easiest part of the whole protocol, right? You don't have to take anything out. You don't have to eat the, weird, super weird food. You're really just basically taking some supplements and some additional food-based things to repair the gut lining. That's pretty straightforward. We'll talk about that process probably takes a little bit longer than the rest of them to actually work. But it's really easy to kind of follow that principle. So most people can find that the repair stage is something that they can maintain long period of time. It's usually the remove and the rebalance piece that are just the more troublesome with self-motivation and accountability to kind of stay accountable and maintain their progress. So the rebalance piece, like I said, I'm telling you, this is the one I struggle the most with, but it's the most important. You could take all the supplements in the world and eat right and move your body, do all the things, but if you're not working on your stress, then you're always going to deal with a little bit of gut issues. And seems to be the hardest for females. So rebalance just basically means to manage your stress, right? So whatever stress management form that you choose to do that has worked for you in the past or that you want to try, do that and do it routinely. This part takes a little bit longer to actually start working as well. On average, we see about 2 weeks for people who start a mindfulness-based program before they start seeing the results from that. Remember, it's about the hormones in the brain. It's an anti-inflammatory support. So it takes a little bit of work, but it can be kind of challenging. But the reason why this is so important is this concept between the gut and the brain, right? So there's this gut-brain axis. Most of us have heard what this means. And basically, the gut and the brain are one continuous organ. So both of them look very similar. They kind of get that back and forth Ruge pattern on them. They both serve to help support neurotransmitter. Most of the neurotransmitter, which are the brain hormones, like your serotonin that keeps you calm, your dopamine that gives you that pleasure reward, your norepinephrine that kind of gives you that mental energy. Most of those hormones are actually manufactured in the gut based on certain bacteria that actually has a role to play with the brain to kind of calm us down and help kind of balance us out a little bit. But if either one of these are in balance, then you're going to start to see an issue elsewhere in the body as well. So it's a complex bidirectional, meaning it talks to each other. It communicates with the central nervous system and the GI tract. This dynamic relationship does play a crucial role in maintaining overall health because it influences also immune system activation, metabolism, and then obviously our emotional well-being. And then practicing mindfulness is probably the best, most effective stress reduction technique that we can do to practice to actually have really long, profound changes in our overall body by reducing inflammation and promoting better digestion. So those butterflies that you get in your stomach when you're in a situation that is not super comfortable for you, public speaking or whatever, that's the brain. That's the nervous system in the brain acting on the nervous system on the gut. So that's one of those two are so related. All right. So obviously, if we don't have a good stress management program, we are forced with the chronic stress. Now, the acute stress in our body, that's actually pretty helpful. Like our body is supposed to have some aspect of acute stress. That acute stress is our fight or flight, if you will. So that's going to get us out of deadly situations, right? So if we're being chased by a bear, we need to get out of there. We need to get out of there fast. So there's no long-term harm done for the body for those acute neurotransmitter productions. That's epinephrine, norepinephrine. That's to keep you alive. The problem comes in is when that norepinephrine, epinephrine come up and stay up, then they get burned off super, super fast, right? So something else has got to come in and say, goodness gracious, this lady's been running from a bear for the last 20 years, right? She's burning out of her epinephrine, norepinephrine. It starts making more and more chronic stress hormone, which is your cortisol, essentially. So most of this is not manufactured in the gut. Most of these hormones are actually manufactured in the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are these small glands that sit above the kidneys on each side, and they pump out a ton of different hormones in the body. Norepinephrine, epinephrine are your fight or flight hormones. And then cortisol is also going to be released in response to chronic stress. So, not just psychological stressors we're talking about. So, the stress of being a mom and stress of being, a husband or an employee. We're talking about the stressors in our body that are also causing a cortisol imbalance. So that could be blood sugar imbalances, that could be eating inflammatory foods, that could be a chronic infection like Lyme or something going on there. It could be a dysregulation in our other immune system, so we could have autoimmunity. So any of these things can actually cause chronic stress in our body. So the psychological or physiological full body stress can also put more stress on the gut-brain axis. So what happens if we don't find a way to get rid of our triggers of stress and balance them better is inflammation, right? So inflammation is caused by cortisol levels. Typically what happens is cortisol levels are going to go high first. So cortisol level is your body's steroid production, if you will. So steroids are supposed to be anti-inflammatory, but they do everything else too. They kind of increase your blood sugar, they increase your heart rate, they increase your blood pressure. And the reason is because if you're running from a bear, you need a whopping amount of sugar to kind of give you energy. You need a really good heart rate and rhythm and blood pressure so we can get blood flow to all of our organs and our periphery so we can run faster and better. We can also see things like sweating. Interestingly enough, if you're someone who sweats under a lot of stress, I've always been heard it told that actually the body's protective mechanism. So if you were being grabbed by an intruder, then you can actually slip away from them. That's why we sweat during when our fight or flight. But again, the body doesn't know the difference between you're running from an actual bear or you're just in a traffic jam and you're late for work, right? So we have to make sure that when we start to feel these symptoms in our body's under that much stress, and we have to be, it's mind over matter, is get ourselves out of that as fast as possible. We're not truly in a life or death experience. So again, the cortisol levels typically go up the fastest to counteract that inflammation, but they can't go up and stay up all day long, right? They're supposed to peak first thing in the morning. That's a little bit more energizing. Cortisol gets you out of bed in the morning. It helps regulate your body temperature, your blood pressure, your blood sugar. But chronic stress is going to cause eventually what's called adrenal fatigue, and the adrenal glands just start burning out from producing all this cortisol. Specifically after menopause, this piece of the puzzle is so important. It kind of is the difference between why some women just cruise right through menopause and never have the slightest hot flash, and some women are absolutely miserable. They start gaining weight, they start developing heart disease, they start having all these sleep issues, metabolic syndrome. The difference between those two women is typically their cortisol production, right? So after menopause, when the ovaries aren't producing the estrogen and progesterone and testosterone that your body needs anymore, we typically rely on the adrenal glands to actually produce these hormones. So the adrenal glands are just sitting there, they're happy, they're healthy, they're just trying to regulate blood sugar and stress. And then here comes menopause. So we have no estrogen production by the ovaries, no testosterone. We're also supposed to stop producing those hormones. Something else has to do it. So the adrenal gland says, "Oh yeah, I got some extra time. I can come help you out." And it starts producing the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone that your body needs to stay young and healthy. Well, the problem is we're modern day females and this process is so broken, right? Our adrenal glands have just been trying to keep us alive from running from the bear for the last 20, 30 years. It ain't going to produce our sex hormones anymore. So then we start seeing these very, very swings between perimenopause and menopause because the adrenal glands aren't helping out at all. So these women are typically very inflamed. They have weight gain, they have brain fog, they get sick a lot, they have joint aches and pains, all because their adrenal glands are already burnt out. But we also start seeing them having heart disease because the inflammation that's associated there. By the way, heart disease isn't really so much an issue with too much cholesterol in the system, which is despite what you've been told for the last, I don't know, many, many years. It's actually more of an inflammatory process. The cholesterol molecule is part of that process, but it's usually the amount of inflammation in the woman's system. And then she doesn't have enough estrogen to protect her arteries, and the arteries start getting stiff. So that's why heart disease is such a big killer among women. It's a hormonal inflammatory cascade, not just a cholesterol issue. And then, of course, we see digestive issues. This is fairly normal. If you've got stress, you're usually going to have some symptoms in the gut, right? So either loose stools or chronic constipation, neither which is good. And then, of course, that eventually will affect our behavior and our mental health. We start seeing anxiety and depression set in as well. And that's kind of more of a long-term issue of chronic stress. So yeah, again, just to recap, the cortisol is the hormone produced by the adrenal glands, and it is produced in the response to, yes, the body's chronic stress response, but cortisol has to be produced in a small amount every single day, right? That we just need that to start surviving. And the cortisol imbalance occurs when the body produces too much or too little of this hormone, and it leads to a range of both physiological and psychological effects. So cortisol balance is going to be absolutely key in everything. So these symptoms, you can actually just have non-GI or non-gut symptoms of cortisol. So that could be fatigue, weight gain or weight loss, mood issues. We see people craving certain foods. I see sugar cravings and salt cravings, both associated with adrenal dysfunction. Blood sugar starts to go up. They develop metabolic syndrome. We have joint aches and pains, and then brain fog, trouble concentrating, and of course the digestive issues as well. We can actually diagnose a cortisol imbalance, and most of the clients that go through one of my functional wellness programs, like a full wellness program, we typically will do a cortisol test on them just to see how healthy they are going through perimenopause and postmenopause, just to make sure that their body has what it needs to kind of soar right through that portion of it. It's really hard to get someone balanced with their hormones if they have an appropriate cortisol balance in their body. And then we treat that using lifestyle modifications. We do a lot with dietary restrictions, things in the standard American diet, the processed foods, the sugar are going to all cause cortisol levels to go up. Your specific food sensitivities will also cause a cortisol imbalance, and then just lack of stress management. So we talk about all that stuff. We talk about moving your body, and then we also talk about things like supplementation, Chinese herbs, and that kind of stuff. Alrighty. Let's see. Okie dokie. So this slide just basically tells us like there's a balance, right? Too much cholesterol, too much cortisol or not enough cortisol. Both of them are not good. And both of those need to be treated. So usually the high cortisol, those patients are typically very anxious. They start out very anxious and high anxiety, and then they eventually go down to a lot of fatigue and depression. And then the low cortisol, those patients are usually very depressed. They can't get out of bed in the morning. They've got no motivation. They're getting sick constantly, and all their joints and are hurting as well. So the symptoms can kind of be all over the map here. So how do you balance your stress? And everybody does this a little differently. I think that the most important thing is making sure you're moving your body. I think that exercising regularly, now this is a little controversial, because exercise actually increases cortisol in the acute phase. So it actually causes a mild inflammatory response. But then that usually burns off within a couple hours after the exercise. That's why it's not a really good idea to exercise late in the evening, because you're still high on cortisol when you go to bed. And then at that point, your body will compensate and eventually get down the inflammation. So this one's interesting. So I usually tell patients if they are really, really inflamed when they start this, or they already have like adrenal fatigue, and then they start a heavy exercise program, they can actually get worse. So if you feel really bad after exercise, you've got brain fog, you have a lot of dizziness. Sometimes we'll see things with blood sugar imbalances after exercise. If you just feel really bad and have a delayed um, uh, 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 recovery response, like if you just get really, really stiff joints and stiff muscles significantly after an exercise regimen, then you might be overdoing it. And I usually recommend for those people is to continue to please move their bodies, but maybe don't do it in such a high impact way. Like maybe the HIIT training is probably not a bad idea or not the best idea when you're already in adrenal fatigue. So this is like walking, jogging, and yoga. If you're something who's already super stressed out, and you have a lot of anxiety, then yes, you may be a better person to tolerate that heavy exercise. Any kind of relaxation techniques, and these are different for different people. I think that I think it's even biblical for us to do some sort of meditation or deep breathing. I think we're supposed to rest and digest. So whatever works for you, right? I do think that either really deep breathing exercises, what's called box breathing. So you're basically breathing in for a count of 4 and then breathing out to a count of 8 and kind of keep that like build a little box in your brain essentially. So you're really trying to focus on closing that 4 square box when you're doing that, breathing in for a count of 4, breathing out on a count of 8, breathing in for a count of 4, breathing out a count of 8, and doing that about 10 times. And that really kind of calms down that cortisol. Even like really deep abdominal breathing, and when you breathe, make sure you're not just breathing from your chest, right? We really want to stimulate that vagus nerve, which is deep into our diaphragm area. Meditation, again, like that could be, it's really impossible to completely clear your mind, but meditate. I like using a Bible verse or scripture or some sort of mantra that works for you to kind of help you relax your brain, and say that over and over again. That's kind of what meditation is. It's just to stop focusing on the stressful world around us that we actually have no control over, or little control over, and focus on what we can do, which is our breathing and getting our body to the state of relaxation. This can also look at things like journaling, coloring. Some people I know love to really like the what's the word? Like just crafts, right? So that craft may be like quilting for you. It may be word games, whatever that looks like for you that has worked in the past, that you can let you focus on that one thing and not everything. Then you probably would be choose one of those things and do that consistently. And then social interaction. I really do think that we're supposed to live in community. I do think that we are supposed to like have friends and call upon people and like pour into people. And I think we getting other people's energy from that as well is really, really good. So find people that you can agree that are not toxic for you, right? That actually pour into you and love you, and check on them too. There's something rewarding that you get from those interactions. So all of these things can be done. I did add a couple additional just slides on like specific outcomes that the research has said for like stress management and what it does. But overall, they all kind of do the same thing, right? Like, and I did specifically PMDD research when I was doing my doctoral project, and we talked about mindfulness, and it looks like just pick one, any of them, and do that consistently. But you really want to do that for like, I mean, exercise versus crafts versus meditation versus journaling. I think it's different for every person. So you just pick whatever works really good for me. I love grounding personally. I've always been someone who like loves to, as a kid, I would go out and hug trees. I know that sounds as ridiculous, but there was something in that energy that made me feel really calm. I mean, it was cool to the touch too. It felt really good. So I will go out and ground bare feet to the soil and the dirt and the grass, and it just feels so good. We are energy beings, right? Like we work on an energy spectrum. Our brain works on energy. Our heart works on energy. Every cell in our body is a energetic conduit. There's constantly energy kind of flowing through us, and the earth has its own energy source. So, if we're in concrete buildings all day long, we're not grounding as well as we would if we were outside to bare feet. So try that and see how that makes you feel. Generally, the rule of thumb that I've seen in the literature, specifically for people with PMDD, it's about 10 to 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week. And if you could try to get in the habit of doing these every day, even better. All right, so that kind of in summary, we talked this week. I know that there was a short session for repairing our gut lining and rebalancing our stress reduction. So curious if any of you have anything to add for what works really good for stress reduction, right? So this works really good for you. This is what your favorite thing to do, and this is what you've seen through your relaxation technique. What's your favorite thing to do? Or if you have a mantra that you want to share with someone, or a favorite Bible verse, put that in the chat box. Looks like there's a couple questions in here. I'll try to get down to this. Is it okay to use cow's colostrum with a dairy allergy? There's different components to it, actually a true dairy allergy. Most dairy allergies are more of a casein, which is a protein in that. Colostrum may or may not contain that. So I would say it depending on how severe that allergy is. If you're talking full-blown head to toe rash, I probably wouldn't try it, right? There's other things that you can use like the bone broth and bovine sources of immunoglobulins that can help just as well. I'll be honest with you, I don't use a ton of colostrum in my practice because I've always been kind of anxious to see like where they're getting it, where they're sourcing it from. And most of these manufacturers won't tell you. That always makes me a little bit nervous. So we use more of the bone broth and glutamine and zinc in the practice. And there I have a product from Microbiome Labs, which is called Mega Mucosa, that actually heals the gut lining and has actual immunoglobulins in it, but it does not have any colostrum. But as far as like, can you use it? I would say you don't know until you try it and to see kind of how you feel about that. But if you know you have a true dairy allergy, you feel really bad when you have dairy, and we're not talking about lactose, like that's not gonna, there's no lactose in colostrum to my knowledge. It's just kind of a trial and error and see how you feel with it. But if you're nervous, there's other forms that you can avoid it. Is trouble setting down for sleep? So, yes. So typically what I see in my practice for specifically women, we burn through our cortisol all day long. So we wake up, we've got a little cortisol enough to get us out of bed in the morning, and then the rest of the day we're just running on fumes. We're so tired, we can't seem to wake our bodies up and our brains up. So we're drinking coffee and caffeine all day long to get us some energy in. And then when it's time to settle down at nighttime, our cortisol levels finally have a chance to start replenishing themselves. And then we see a spike of cortisol right before bed. That's the worst time to have high cortisol. If you are experiencing that, there have been some additional benefits with things like adaptogenic herbs. So these are herbs like ashwagandha, Asian ginseng. You've seen these adrenal cocktails that people take at bedtime. It's basically loaded with magnesium, which is a great adaptogen, some vitamin C in there, and then usually there's some herbs that really kind of help modulate the stress. I have in my practice used a compound called phosphatidylserine. It's a naturally occurring compound in the human body that does lower high cortisol. I usually won't recommend that to clients unless we actually have lab evidence that they're high cortisol, just because you don't want to over treat them. And then we start worrying about like really low cortisol. Another thing for, another reason someone would be really high at nighttime is usually just their stressful routine, right? So women get home at 6 o'clock at night, we're having to cook dinner for everyone, we're cleaning the house, we finally have time to get things done. And then our body says, okay, she's in fight or flight. Let's go to war kind of thing. So you have to be super intentional. And I love that drive home, even if it's a 5-minute drive home or a 30-minute drive home, is to play some really good relaxing music therapy, deep breathing, whatever you can do to kind of get yourself into that state of calm and remind yourself you're not going into war. You're just going to make dinner, right? So it's a mind over matter to kind of help calm that down. Yeah, I like sourdough bread. Sourdough bread kind of talks more about the reinoculate. So sourdough does have some additional benefits for like a probiotic, essentially. Some people with gluten sensitivities, just a word of caution, most of you are going to do okay with sourdough bread, but if you have a true like celiac or really significant gluten sensitivity, and even through the first phase of the elimination diet, I would probably stay away from sourdough. But sourdough is kind of a naturally occurring probiotic, and it does seem to kind of help source really good lactobacillus and other really good, I think even bifidobacter has been associated with that as well. So I think it could be a really good tool to use. I love intermittent fasting. I think we talked about that a little bit last week as well. Intermittent fasting just kind of gives your body a state, or your gut a state of rest, right? So anything you eat, even if it's the cleanest, most natural, amazing organic source of like anti-inflammatory fish oil or broccoli or something really, really good and healthy that's good for your gut, there's a small amount of inflammation that has to happen to even digest that food. So we want to be able to go a little bit of a break between meals. Intermittent fasting is really just a big fancy word, but don't eat in the middle of the night, right? Like I've had patients who get up at 3 o'clock in the morning because they have that cortisol release and they're starving, and they go down and eat Mountain Dew or drink Mountain Dew or something horribly inflammatory in the middle of the night. So really, if you're doing a good intermittent fasting as a maintenance, I would say maybe like 9 a.m. to break your fast, and then 6 p.m. to stop eating. If you get home later in the evening, maybe do like a 10 a.m. to break fast, and then 7 p.m. to stop eating. So just no calories. have a little bit later breakfast and then no calories past dinner is essentially what it is. Bone broth does count as breaking your fast because there is some calories associated with that protein in that. But you can slip on some herbal teas. Herbal teas are great for the gut. So the like peppermint tea, sometimes chamomile tea as well. So you're good. But no, the supplements typically will not unless they have calories in them. So calories meaning a protein amino acid, carbohydrates with their sugar, and or some other sort of fatty acid. As long as they don't have those three, then they do not break your fast. So breaking your fast actually has to include a caloric intake, and even one tiny little calorie coming from a little bit of a like a mint or something like that, technically that is a break fast. That any kind of calories whatsoever is a break fast. Now, some people would disagree with that, and there's like a scientific threshold, that kind of stuff. I don't know. I say just stay away from calories altogether because anything is going to cause a little bit of an inflammatory reaction in the gut. So even like your creamer in your coffee is technically a break fast. So I would do no calories whatsoever. So hot tea is fine. Water is fine, but if you're having calories, you have broken your fast, in my opinion. All righty. That I believe is all that we had for this evening. Oh, I did have a couple more additional things. Okay, so these are more oh, what's the word? Not invasive, more uh what's the word? Fran, you may be helping with this. It's just a more tactical, more strategic, more therapeutic, if you will, therapies for managing your stress. So these are usually incorporating someone else who has a degree in this, who can talk you through these techniques. Cognitive behavioral therapy is amazing. The research on this is awesome because it basically helps you retrain the way the brain processes these stressful behaviors. This is especially good for people who have a lot of trauma, or if they're just like stuck in that fight or flight and they can't seem to get out of it, even with habit forming. So, cognitive behavioral therapy kind of retrains the brain in order to break those bad habits, essentially. Talk therapy is great. Love it. Love to be able to talk to someone through these emotions and what do these mean and how do these impact me. And you can learn a lot about your body through talk therapy. And then guided imagery, if you have someone to kind of help you through this guided imagery, there are apps that you can get as well. I really particularly love, like there's a mindful app, and I haven't done these in quite a bit, full disclosure, but there's used to be some really good ones. Abide is a spiritual based one, a faith based one, but there's a ton of other options out there that you can use to kind of help just guide you through what that feels like to relax. And some of them are just basically you're in a forest and all these tall trees and it smells like evergreen. It's absolutely amazing. And it's kind of just puts you into that state of relaxation by guiding you through basically a make-believe image because our current environment stresses us out, right? Like we've got too many things. I go to my bedroom and I'm like, I want to decorate it, right? I want to add the crown molding. I want new bedspread. I want new furniture. Oh, that say there's a stain on the carpet. I got to get that done. So it's like the environment in which are in. It's just like our brains are just constantly trying to problem solve, and like the guided imagery to kind of get you out of that. So this is how often to practice it. I say I love regular practice, and I think the research is pretty clear on about 4 days a week for about 15, 20 minutes at a time. But you can do this at any point, right? When you're feeling stressed out, kind of practice these techniques. There are also some additional techniques called oh, what's the word? It's like tapping. It's essentially tapping, and there are specific points on the body that you can tap. And this works really good for teenagers because they get into that fight or flight, they get into that anxiety stage, and they're like near panic, and they can't seem to get themselves out of it. And a lot of therapists who are trained in this will teach them tapping techniques that look ridiculous, but they actually are very therapeutic. And it's almost like the brain has to focus on an external stimuli, so it can't focus on the internal stimuli anymore, and it kind of switches that off. So that's very effective for a lot of people. And then any kind of challenging situation like public speaking or something like that, anything that is going to put you into fight or flight, just really start to practice that deep breathing exercise. Those box breathing is really good for this. And then just being preventative, make this a daily habit to kind of help with that. So I promised you earlier, I'll talk about what this looks like to heal the gut. Now, this is a general thing that I see in my practice, and I don't know how scientific this is. If you're going to find this in research, a different practitioner may see something different than what I see. But essentially, right at about a week of eliminating those foods that are super inflammatory, your body starts starting to heal, and you're starting to see some improvement. And usually, those are more like headaches. And skin rashes are starting to improve at about the 1 week mark. 2 to 4 weeks, most people are starting to see the benefit of like taking the digestive enzymes. So if we do blood work, we can start to see the vitamin D levels going up, the zinc levels going up, and they're able to digest their food better. We're also able to see better defecation, so less constipation, less diarrhea, that kind of thing. It's going to take 4 to 6 weeks minimum to actually start to heal the microbiome. So taking probiotics and eating probiotic-rich foods, nothing's going to change with the microbiome for at least 4 to 6 weeks. Same thing for the gut lining, usually 30 days minimum for that gut lining to start to improve. There is a specific probiotic on the market called Megaspore. Megaspore is, they actually did a small clinical trial that showed that they could improve leaky gut, the gut barrier function by about 60% within the first 4 weeks of continuous use of their Megaspore at a therapeutic dose. So we think about 4 weeks is about the goal with interventions. And then about 8 to 12 weeks, you're starting to feel better and your immune system's working better. We can start seeing some of those antibodies going down, those autoantibodies. But it really is going to take a good 16 weeks to actually see blood work improve or inflammation markers, that kind of stuff at about the 16 weeks. And then roughly about 4 months. And most of our wellness programs are about 4 months in length for that very purposes, because it takes, 2 months to really see the really good benefit, and then 4 months for the body really start to heal. But you're not completely healed in 4 months. Nobody ever is, right? Most people, it took me 2 years to heal my gut before I could truly go into full blown remission and start to put things get away with it, eating a little gluten and a little dairy again, a little sugar without going into full blown flare. So in my opinion, that was healing for my body. So about the 2 year mark that took for full healing. So these things include intentionality, right? You didn't get sick overnight, you're not going to heal overnight, so they take a long time. But usually that 4 weeks is when we start to say, okay, we can probably try to put a few things back in our diet. We're going to need to maintain the other stuff like the rebalance, the reinoculate, the repair stage. We have to continue that for a while. But for now, the first stage of the elimination is usually about 4 weeks, and we can start to take that away. So next time we're going to talk, most of you are not going to be 28 days in quite yet until we hit that 4 week mark, which will be next week. I'm going to tell you what to put back in, how to put it back in, and what to anticipate kind of moving forward. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully we can start to work on more of the rebalance and relaxation techniques. If you find something that works really good for you, you find a really good app, or if you're like, hey, I really love this, this protocol, then share that with the group through the app. We would love to hear what you're doing and how you're improving. And then if you can make it the full 4 weeks, we're going to be talking Thursday about how to reintroduce foods back into your diet. So does anybody have any additional questions? Would you like to unmute yourself and share any questions with me? Thank you so much for being interactive tonight. Those are really good questions that we've seen come through. All right, it looks like we're good to go wrap up. I will turn off the recording, and I'll have this recorded for you if anybody is interested and want to pass it along. If you miss a bit of it tonight, you're welcome to listen to it later. Send any questions that you do have through the app, and I'll be looking out for that. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.